welcome to another tutorial video. For today's one, I was kind of going for creating a faux layered embossing folder technique. You know when you have embossing folders that have got the multiple dimension to them? I was kind of going for that sort of technique and it sort of worked. However, I did have to kind of resort back to a die to make the deer pop out and using the same die as I'd used in the background. But I think it still gives a really cool result. Whether it was the exact idea I was going for or not, I think it still gives a really cool result. So I'm going to go with this colour scheme. I really like how this turned out, but I'm going to use the deer die and the same background that I used on this one as well. I used a couple of different backgrounds, but I will let you know everything that I used. And colour scheme wise on this one, if you did want to know what colour scheme I had used here, I used Crackling, Campfire, Aged Mahogany and Ground Espresso Distress Oxides, and then I threw a load of Cosmic Shimmer at it. I used a little bit of the graphite gilding polish. I don't know why the label's gone red on that, but I used a tiny bit of graphite gilding polish. I also used quite a bit of rich red gilding polish. I brought in one of the gilded touches. This is like a brown, but it's got like a green mica in it. I also used some of these metallic paints. There's a normal shimmer paint from Cosmic Shimmer which is called Antique Bronze, and then there's luster paint, a metallic luster paint from Cosmic Shimmer which is called Chocolate Gold, and I did also use those on this background as well. And then the sprinkling effect across this is, I did use splatter to begin with, however some of the splatter was picking up some of the oxide colours from the background. So I did end up sprinkling on some of Francoise's embossing sprinkles. Now, because I used two 300 GSM, well technically it's three 300 GSM layers, it would not heat from underneath like you normally have to do with Francoise's embossing crystals or sprinkles. So you do have to kind of use your hairdryer style heat tool, you know, the Ranger one, more gently from above to get them to heat. If I feel like the one we're going to do needs some sprinkles, I'll show you how to do that, but if not, just try. You can try from underneath if you want, but I was heating it for ages and not even a tiny bit of it had melted on the top layer to get through the 900 GSM that was underneath it. So definitely being more gingerly and holding it further away with the Ranger heat tool, which has like a less forceful air coming out of it, is the best way to go to get those to melt. But if I do feel like it needs it, then I will add some later on to show you that too. But that is one version of this card, and this was using this background, which is from Jamie Rogers. It's one of his pierced collection, the Christmas one. This was the first time I'd used it because I'd only got this one relatively recently, but it's beautiful piercing design in here. I don't know if you saw any of his shows on the telly or if you've seen any of his samples or examples using his dies, but this one, when I did my sample for this one, I actually hand sewed it all and added little beads onto it, and it looks fantastic when you can spend that time to use like beading thread and a beading needle and tiny little seed beads. It looks fantastic to actually sew this. But his actual method behind doing these is he's given you all of the little piercing holes, so if you do want to do sewing, you've got the perfect place to put your beading needle through. And I would recommend a beading needle because the eye of them is much smaller, so you're not going to open up these holes too much. But his idea behind them is that you can just run a pen, a pencil, anything along those lines, and it goes between the dots, and it really does look like a stitch from a sewing machine. So you've got like a cheat's way of doing the stitching, or you can just leave it as it is. It looks beautiful as like the pierced design as well. But this was the background I used on this one. However, I feel like it was maybe a bit too solid. You can't really tell what it's supposed to be in the background. So I've used this background behind this one, and I'm going to use this background behind the deer for the final card to show you in the tutorial as well. And then I really like how this one turned out. I absolutely adore this Paper Cuts edger. Both of these main focal dies are Paper Cuts dies. I think this one was last year, or they might have both been 2020 actually. This was, they're both Paper Cuts. This was more of like whimsical kind of Christmassy collection, and I think there was Santa and snowmen and stuff in them as well that were more like a panel design. And then this was one of the edger collections with like the gorgeous Bethlehem scene with Silent Night in it as well. And these were two of my favourites from those two collections that came out before. So I don't know if you can still get these, but you might be able to. I'm sure there's a few places that might still have a few of them available. Maybe the bigger places might have sold out of them, but I'm sure there'll be a few retailers that still have these two beautiful designs, and those are the ones that I have used. So I'll move all of those dies out of the way, and I can start showing you how I actually created this card. So I'm going more with this style, sort of, but I am gonna use this colour scheme because I felt like this gave the effect that I was going for. The fact that you could ink the entire thing with your background colours, and then you had that darker element bringing it back over the top to do this colour scheme, whereas this one, it's all very monochromy. I did keep trying to bring in more darker colours, but I didn't want to darken it up too much or bring black in, and none of my browns were like dark enough. So this one sort of does, I think this one looks more like a layered embossing folder like I was going for. So that kind of, you know, I achieved the effect that I was going for, but I preferred the results of this one. I just really love that scene, I think. So we'll see how well this colour scheme transfers to the deer version of this card. But as you saw on this one, there's white deer on this one, so I pinched the deer out of the other die cut that I already had ready to show you. So instead of having a deer in this one, we're going to go with the beautiful snowflake background. You can see it's got, you know, holes missing out of it, and it's got all of that beautiful pierced detail and everything. But I'm going to put that onto the white card, so it looks like an embossing folder already. This kind of looks like an embossed piece of card then. But we're then going to bring in the frame here. So I just nicked the deer out the centre of this one to use on that card because I felt like I wanted to pick the deer back out. But then I thought, well, I don't want to waste this one. And if I leave it in my drawer, it might get, you know, scrunched, and all the bits and pieces might get all bent and stuff. So I thought, well, we'll just use this to create the card for the tutorial. So we're going to do a forest scene, but instead of having a deer as the focal element, that beautiful background is going to be our focal element plus our sentiment. So here, this one, the sentiment cuts out into that edger, but I really liked recessing the white one back in once I'd finished doing all the inking, and it stands out really, really nicely. So we're going to go with a couple of one of Sue Wilson's Noble dies from her 2022 release. I'm going to do two Merries stacked together to make it thicker, and then this one actually says a joyful Christmas, but you can snip off the word Christmas. So instead of using the really large Christmas that comes with that word merry, we can use that fine scripty Christmas to go with that as well. So we'll come back to those later on, and I'll show you how I snipped off a joyful off of that one too. But first of all, we want to start with creating our background. I did notice there's a couple of pieces in here that I haven't poked out yet, so I'll poke those out. And I have used 300 GSM white card to cut these out, but you could go with a thinner card if you wanted to. I just really wanted to kind of create that embossing folder look, and I think a thicker card makes it look like it was a more impressive embossing folder, that it actually like pushed the card up that much to give it some dimension. So that's why I went with 300. And we could, if we wanted to, maybe even like twist this and put it in an angle maybe, because this is going to hide some of those outside edges. Or do I like it as it is? I don't know, because I quite like having a point at the top of a snowflake, so maybe we could orient it so that there is a point at the top of the snowflake and then put the frame around it to make it look a little bit different. And with this one from Jamie, all of these snowflakes fall out of it, so you can use those on other projects as well. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 just from that one die cut. You get 8 of those little snowflakes, so you can definitely use those as well. So if I'm going to put it so the point is that way, I've got to sort of look at the edges where it's going to fall on my main card piece that I've already cut down to size, and I'm kind of looking at how far these pieces are falling off so that I can get it sort of central on the card. And then we're going to flip this over and add a load of glue to the back of this. So this takes a little bit of time, so I might speed this up. Okay, so I think I've got enough glue in all of the places. I am just going to try and tap a little bit off on the back of my hand just so there's no like real big blobs of glue to come through. And then remembering how I had sort of thought about it before, if we want that point to be upwards, we were kind of orienting those two off like so. I think that will work nicely. And then we want to press that down into place. It doesn't matter too much if some of the glue seeps out, 'cause some of this is going to get hidden by the next layer, but also we're not only just putting distress oxides on here, we're also going to put some gilding polish or luster polish on here, so it doesn't matter too much if there is glue, because any of those areas where the glue is stopping the ink from like sitting on there, it's kind of like resisting it, we can actually deliberately put a little bit of our gilding polish over the top of that, and then the gilding polish will definitely go over the top of the glue. So once you've got that first layer stuck down, you want to trim off this excess to make sure that you can get your main image in the position that you want it to be in on your finished panel. So we can trim this down. I'm not doing a very good job. I've cut into my panel there, so I might have to trim this with the guillotine as well. And I've cut into it again. Goodness me. If I can get one straight edge, then I can use that when I cut into my guillotine. So I am going to go with the guillotine. Sometimes you can get away with not using the guillotine. This is actually a bit bigger than my normal panel size anyway. So I'm going to, so you can actually just use it to trim off the excess as well. Whatever, so you can see how wonky, I don't actually, you can't tell, can you? How wonky I went just there, I snipped into it. So cut that off, and I will cut that side off as well because I made that one wonky too. Okay, so now we've got our really nice, neat, squared edges again, not wonkily cut. We can decide, because that has actually gone slightly higher, you know, to one side than the other, there's a little bit more space down here in the design. We can decide, do we want the starbursty kind of piece to be higher up or lower up, depending on which way we stick this onto the pattern or onto the panel. So we're going to put our Merry Christmas on like so. So do we like that being with the star underneath, or do we like it the other way up, where it's kind of going across the middle? I think I prefer it that way. So we're going to go this way up, which is with the star piece slightly closer to the top of the card. And then you've kind of got to eyeball where you think this one is going to go. Because this one is slightly bigger than my small size of card, it's slightly wider. So I definitely want to still get a whole frame. So these tree trunks, I would like there to be one on each side. But you can kind of gauge, do you want there to be a little bit more white space with this at the top? Do you want to be more white space at the bottom and risk cutting off a bit of the owl? Or do you want to kind of like centralise it in the middle? So I think I want it about like that, where that mouse is just on there. You can also, did I still have it up here? Yes. You can keep that mouse that pops out. So if I can pick it up, it's got stuck on a die. This little tiny mouse falls out of there. It's so adorable. You could actually stick that back on top, and you could have the mouse sitting on top of that cow parsley just there. So I might do that as well. So again, I will speed this bit up, adding glue to the back of this. Okay, so we've got glue all over the back of that, and just putting the needle in there. Then again, we're going to tap off the excess as much as we can, and then position this back where we want it to be on our project. So I think like so, and then we can press all of that into position, just like we did with the first one, and this is kind of giving that second layer. So that's why I was kind of thinking it could be like a double layered embossing folder. I don't think it quite gives the illusion that I was hoping it would, but it gives you an idea of how you might be able to use some dies that you already have to kind of try and create that sort of idea, because I often do the faux embossing folder look just with die cuts, and I like doing it with sentiment dies quite a lot as well. So I'm going to add that gorgeous little mouse just there, I think. Or we could put it up there. No, I think just over here will look good. Okay, just like so. And then we can flip this over and trim off the excess from this as well. And this time I'm going to be more careful so I don't cut into the panel because I've already trimmed it to size. You do end up with quite a thick panel at the end, but it's still reasonably thin, you know, to be able to post it. It's not like we've added multiple layers of like a 2 or 3 millimeter foam between them or anything. But it is about 900 GSM together. Okay, so we've trimmed all of the edges off of that now, so we've got our finished kind of panel, and you can see how different it looks without the deer in and with the different pattern in the background as well. And then if we compare to this one, the pattern is more hidden, so you're seeing more of the outside pieces and only a small bit of the interior pieces behind the scene, whereas this one we've got a lot of focus on that beautiful snowflakey kind of design in the centre. So, next step is to take your inks. So I'm going to go with the same colours as I did for that Bethlehem one. So we're going to go mustard seed and carved pumpkin as well. And I'd only just bought carved pumpkin because I found out I was getting annoyed that spiced marmalade was not orangey enough in an Oxide. It's very yellowy orange, whereas I wanted an actual orangey orange, but I didn't want it as dark as Crackling Campfire, so I decided to buy the carved pumpkin in the end. So I'm going to go in with the mustard seed to begin with, and we can cover everything. It doesn't matter if we get ink in places that we don't want, because the other colour we're going to use after we've done this as our background is Villainous Potion, and it's really dark and purple, so we're really not going to see any of this colour if we do put it in a place where we decide we didn't actually want it in the end. So we're just going to get really good coverage on all of this. Make sure we go through all of those aperture details on the outside piece as well. And these brushes are really good for getting down into that detail. If you were using an ink blending foam, you would not be able to get into those details. So the brushes are fantastic for this. So we can get right down into the details. Then we can go with a bit of orange, which is the carved pumpkin. And with the other one, I did the orange, so it was kind of like a sunset. Whereas this one, maybe I'll go orange around the edges and try and keep the yellow in the centre. So just focus some of the orange around the edges, but keep that gorgeous yellow. So I suppose we're kind of using that gorgeous sunbursty kind of design as a sunshine, really, if we're going with the oranges around the outsides. And we can blend back in with a little bit more yellow to tone some of that orange down as well. But if you've used Spice Marmalade Oxide, you'll probably see what I mean about getting that carved pumpkin. It gives a really nice orangey tone. It doesn't look that orange on the camera, but in person it is nice and orange. And we've tried to get in as much of that detail, like down into the detail as we can. Then, I've got really mucky fingers now, but we'll put these brushes away. And then with the Villainous Potion, I don't want to get into all of the details with the Villainous Potion. I want to mostly focus it on that top layer. So, you know, with the Silent Night one, it's mostly focused on the top layer. Obviously you can't be 100% perfect, because with any embossing folder you're always going to get a little bit down into the details, so it's the same idea with this really. When you've layered up those die cuts together, you're always going to get a little bit down in the details, but the idea is that you're trying to sort of stay on that outside. So to be able to do that, as I was saying before, if you use a blending foam, it doesn't always get down into those details. So we are going to use a blending foam because we don't want it to get down into those details. So I'm going to load up with some Villainous Potion, and then you can just carefully come in over the top. Now you might be thinking, hang on, that's gone a bit like dark grey and horrible compared to the purple on the Silent Night one, and that's because I am going to put some extra colour over the top of this as well. We're going to go in with some luster polish too. So, but first we just want to get that little bit of dark colour on this so that we can actually, you know, see where everything's going and, you know, get that initial dark layer down onto here. Just being as careful as you can to try and only get it on the raised up bits, but it doesn't matter if it goes into some of the lower down areas as well. But doesn't it look beautiful picking that out, like with the darkness? It gives you like a silhouetted kind of effect, which I think is really pretty. It does work nicely with this one. I wasn't sure if it was still going to look lovely, this colour scheme, with this Woodland deer kind of one, but it does look really good. So we'll just try and get the depth in as many areas as we can. And then if you have got any in the background, we're going to do something to minimise it a little bit so you won't notice it as much. Once we've finished all of our ink blending, we're actually going to spray it with water. It will give it that kind of oxidised look, and it will also kind of help meld any of those little dark patches that we've managed to get into the background. Kind of like melds them into the rest of the background as well. And then once it has dried, we'll come back in with some, I think it's called Plumtastic Luster Polish, and also, what's this one called? Copper Shine Gilding Polish as well. We'll come back in with those to give that beautiful purple effect, and we're going to do some splattering with that as well. But for now, a little bit more darkness in some areas, I think, and then we will spray it with water and leave it to dry. But if you like this result, you can definitely just leave it here too if you want to. I just want to recreate what I did on that first card, so. But there we go, we've got that so far, and that looks brilliant actually. Just as it is, that does look really nice. I mean, obviously the purple is gone more of a browny colour, but or a grey brown kind of colour, but it still looks really lovely. So we're just going to spray that with a couple of spritzes of water, just from a distance. So you can see how it's sort of melding it together a little bit. Some of that darkness from the foreground might seep into some of the areas in the background, but it will give a nice depth to it, I think. And we can also blot off some of this excess water and ink from around the edges as well, so it doesn't kind of pool up too much as it's drying. We can tap a little bit of the excess off of the top there as well. But this was how I did the original one, so I thought I would do the same thing for this one. So that's what we've got so far, and I'm going to leave this to dry and then I'll come back and show you the next step. Okay, so that is all dry now. You can see how it's just given like a nice sort of blended effect, and we're now going to go over the top of this front layer with some gilding polishes and luster polish to sort of give this beautiful shiny effect. You can see, because we've used oxides, it looks kind of like really dull because it's just those pastely oxidized kind of colours. But when we add these metallic gilding polishes over the top, it's really going to bring it all to life. So for this, I was using the Plumtastic Luster Polish, which is a gorgeous dark purple. It's one of my favourites of their polishes, this one. And I'm just going to put a little bit out on my glass mat. And then, because I was using the copper gilding polish on the other card, because I was doing that other deer card at the same time, I did also bring some of the copper onto this as well, and I really liked it. So we're going to put a little bit of the copper out as well. Also another gorgeous colour. I really like purple and copper together. I think it's a really lovely colour combination. So this is the one that I was using a couple of days ago when I made the original 2 cards, and although the sponge has gone quite crusty, and I might have even used it for some paint before this as well, you can still use your sponges. I keep a few of them around. Whenever I've been using them for something, I just leave them on my desk, and there's always another time that you can make use of it and give it another go around before you need to chuck it as well. Or you can wash them out and make them go even further for those kind of techniques as well. So what we're going to do is load that up and then be really careful with how we're bringing this in, similar to how we were when we were ink blending with the dark colour, but we want to be a little bit more careful as well, so that we really try to only stay on the raised up. It doesn't matter if we do go into the other areas, because there are some bits in this in the background that have caught, but we're going to splatter on it later as well. We're going to splatter with the copper and the purple, so it'll kind of disguise that a little bit. I know this has got a very large expanse in the middle, but we are only going to be adding the dark colour to the perimeter, so hopefully we shouldn't run into any problems, and we should be able to hopefully keep that dark colour mainly to the outside edges. But we will be able to disguise any areas with a little bit of splatter later as well. So I'm just going to keep loading up. Don't put too much on your sponge, and you can also just load up one side of it if you want to as well, so that you can be a little bit more purposeful for where you're kind of like taking your sponge tool across your project. And remember to try and keep it as flat against your project as possible. So especially for these fine areas, hopefully we're only just going to touch the surface and add that polish onto the surface areas. If you feel more comfortable going in with your fingers to do this, you can. I'm always just too heavy-handed when I try and be like delicate by applying it like that. So I found this worked nicely for the other one, so I'm going to go with this method again for this one. If you have some of those tiny little ink blending tools, I think they're from Ranger, and they're kind of like a little wooden dowel, and they've got like a little foam or sponge on the end of them. You could definitely use that kind of thing. I don't know how readily available the little sponge replacements are for those, or if you can even replace them, so I don't know whether you would want to use like different mediums on them or not, or whether you'd want to just keep them for your ink. But you can have a play around and see what kind of tools you have in your stash that would work to give a nice precise application. But it doesn't matter if we do get a little bit in the background. We just, if we aim to not get anything in the background, then what we do get in the background will be minimal and will be really easy to disguise. So that's what I'm kind of going for. So just gently trying to get the colour onto these really fine details. This stalk here, I actually cut off the flower because it was joined to the deer. So when I was cutting the deer out, it looked funny just leaving that part little like flower piece on the cow parsley. So I did actually just snip the head off of that one just to make it look a little bit better. It just looks like the flower's fallen off of it rather than a weird misshapen flower where you've cut a deer off of it. So you can see how this is coming together with that purple, and where we let the water activate it, you can see how some of the dark bled into the background, which gives a really nice effect actually. It gives a little bit more depth to the scene, which is nice. There is actually like an owl hiding in this top corner. You can kind of see there. And just that tiny little star there. Then I think we've got pretty good coverage over that. You can have another look at it, see if there's any areas where you feel like you want to deepen the purple colour, maybe not as much of the mica where has come off your sponge in that space, and you want to just add a little bit more of it. I feel like this little flower here needs a little bit more on the end, but I don't want to be too heavy-handed and get it loads in the background. I don't know if that's a bit better. There we go. I won't risk doing any more than that. But yeah, you can just keep adding as much as you want. And then for the copper, keep that purple there, because if we go too heavy-handed with the copper, we might want to add a bit more purple back on. So with the copper, again, I've got another old foam. I'd use this for green paint, turquoise paint, and then I was using it for the copper the other day when I did the other card. So this one has gone really crusty, but actually that's quite handy because it's not going to squish into all of the different areas. And for this, I was just kind of like pouncing some of the copper on to give like a sort of aged look almost, just to add a little bit of like difference to the background as well. But if we go too heavy-handed, then we can just come back in with some more purple, so don't worry about that. We can catch some of these areas maybe, highlight a little bit of the foliage, get some of those poppy seed heads. Okay, so we've got a little bit of the copper on there, and then we'll come back in with the purple just to tone down some of those larger areas of copper. And it also makes the purple look different because you've got the copper underneath rather than the oxide. That was the villainous potion, but it kind of turned into a browny tone, especially when we added the water because it was mixing with the yellow and the orange underneath. And yellowy orangey colours plus purple tend to make a sort of muddy brown colour because they're opposites on the colour wheel. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that. I really like that actually. I think that looks really good, and I don't mind that there's no deer in there. If you wanted to, you could have cut another one, cut the deer out, moved it further down, or I have got somewhere, I don't know if I've still got some cut out. I've got this little pot here with any extras that I've been cutting, and I think I did have a couple of those Sizzix deer left over. I do. So you could even bring in another die set from your stash and put like a deer in the foreground, or replace the deer that was in there with another deer that you have, you know, all sorts of things. You can bring in any little animals, silhouettes, more like little woodlandy kind of creatures like that little mouse as well. You could bring in other elements like that too to kind of add into the scene rather than having the original deer that was in there as well. So now we've got that bit done, we want to add our splatter, because I just love a little bit of splatter on a project. So I'll zoom you out a little bit, and then we're just going to come in with some water, because we would need to add water to this anyway to clean it off of our mat, so we might as well use it whilst it's here and create some beautiful splatter with it. So we're going to go with a bit of purple splatter. I think you can kind of see how a luster polish has like those larger mica flakes in them, so it gives a different kind of effect to other polishes that you might have in your stash. I know there is a gorgeous deep dark purpley colour in the metallic gilding polish range. I think it's called Dark Cherry. I love that one as well, but I really like the luster polish, so I wanted to go for that for this project. But the Dark Cherry would look beautiful as well if you had that one. So just a little bit of splatter. I don't want to go too crazy, but it just adds a little bit of something to the background and disguises, as I was saying before. So a little bit of splatter, maybe a tiny bit more over here, and then some copper splatter, because it looks really nice when you've got the purple on here with a little bit of the copper mottled into it, and then some actual splatter over the top as well. I think it looks lovely. So a little bit like this. And I know I'm doing this as a Christmas card, but this does not have to be a Christmas card at all. I mean, because the colours that I've used on it, it's not screaming Christmas. Because I've taken the deer out of it, it really doesn't look Christmas at all. And the kind of snowflake looks more like a sunburst, and then all of this foliage doesn't have to be Christmas at all. I mean, there's a tiny little, oops, I just put some polish on there. There's a tiny little snowflake, a couple of little ones hidden within the design. You could have snipped those off before you started, and then it wouldn't be Christmassy at all. So it's a versatile kind of design, but also a lot of the other paper cuts dies that you might have would work for this as well. So it doesn't just have to be the paper cuts and the Jamie Rogers dies that I have used here, because I'm sure a lot of Sue Wilson's backgrounds would make fantastic backgrounds for cards like this as well. So now we've got that done, which I really like the look of, I'm going to clean all of this up, wait for that to dry, and then come back so we can add the sentiment. Okay, so now that's dry, I'm going to come back with these sentiments that I showed you at the beginning of the video, and we're going to stack up the two Marys. So this is one of Sue Wilson's Noble expressions from one of her collections from this year. I think maybe it was the second collection. Oh no, it could have been the third one actually. It was either July or August. It wasn't the first one, it was July or August this one came from. But I love this one. That I've used it quite a few times in this Advent series with the Christmas word as well. And even mixing the Christmas word with a different merry as well. Works really nicely. I love mixing and matching different fonts, and it's really nice to switch between different brands as well. So I'm doing merry, and I've double stacked it just to make it have a little bit more impact. And then for the word Christmas, I've taken this word Christmas, and it came from A Joyful Christmas, which is one of her other new sentiments. And all I did was take my scissors, follow this swirl here to snip that piece off, follow this tiny little swirl that comes through the T on the Christmas. Then on the top of the T, I've just snipped it straight across, and then to get the A off as well, you can actually just follow that curve round too, and then it gives you just the word Christmas. So if you get that one, you can do A Joyful Christmas, or if you have another merry die in your stash, you can use it with the merry, or if you have just a merry stamp sentiment as well, you can mix it with that too, or letter dies as well, or letter stamps, letter stickers, anything really. It's really nice to have that versatility, and the way she does a lot of her mini expressions dies, they are so easy to snip apart. Like you might even have a sentiment that says something wishes in it, maybe birthday wishes or something, and you want to have Christmas wishes as your sentiment. You can snip off the birthday, keep the wishes, and combine it with a Christmas that was in a different sentiment as well, and create your own unique sentiments that you know. Obviously the actual sentiment isn't unique like Christmas wishes, but I mean like the way you've got your sentiment from the different dies that you've chosen it from, it's going to be unique compared to somebody else making a card. They're not going to have the same stash as you, and they might not have thought to snip their dies apart and get those different words out of the different elements as well. That's why I like to do that kind of thing, because it just makes your cards different, because nobody else has the same stash as you. So I'm going to go merry first, just to get that into a nice position. And the Christmas has got some lovely swirly bits that I don't mind if they come in front of the word merry, so I want to stick the merry down first. And you can use a ruler if you want to get this totally straight. I always just eyeball my sentiments, and at the moment I'm usually good at eyeballing them. As I get older I'm probably not going to be, but at the moment I can stick them straight, so I'm going to make the most of that. And then I'm just going to put the Christmas across the top there as well. So tiny little dobs of glue on the back of the whole sentiment. And then we'll dab off the excess, and we can put that onto the card as well. It's slightly more important to dab off the excess when you're putting something onto an ink blended background, because if that glue squidges out, it might end up activating the ink from your ink blending, and then you might end up getting like a yellowy orange blob of glue because the glue's picked up the colour. So tapping off that excess really helps stop that from happening. But look how beautiful that looks, and having that swirl in front of the merry, it looks so lovely. So that's what we've got so far. Now the next thing to decide is, do I do some of the embossing sprinkles on there? I don't think it really needs them, but I do kind of want to show you how you can still heat them from the top. You know, if you have done something with multiple layers and you've got like a 900 GSM thickness, you can still put Francoise's beautiful embossing sprinkles on there. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to sprinkle some on and show you. I don't think it needs it, but it'll just add to it, won't it? It's not really going to detract from it. It's going to add to it. So if you have something that's too thick, and maybe it's like a grey board or something as well, maybe you've been working on a grey board embellishment, or maybe like an MDF like postcard or trading coin or something like that, and you just feel like you need some white splatter, but you've used water reactive products in the background, so you know if you add a white splatter it's not going to stay white because the colour from underneath is going to pick up. Sorry, I've got really yellow fingers, I just noticed that. It's from that ink from earlier. But yeah, sometimes you can't put a white splatter on because everything underneath is going to react with it. So that's where these embossing sprinkles come in, and they're by Francoise Reed from Creative Expressions and Cosmic Shimmer and Woodwear. She's actually one of the designers for Woodwear. So I'm just going to take a few in my fingers and sprinkle them onto the background. Now bear in mind, because we're going to be heating from above, they're probably not going to stay where I'm putting them right now. They're probably going to blow around into different areas. So it is literally like you have to sort of stay with what you get, really. It's a little bit luck of the draw as to where they kind of end up staying. And then the next step to this is to take your hairdryer style, like, well, not a hairdryer, but it looks more like a hairdryer. So many people say it's a hairdryer because it looks like one, really, but it's the Ranger Heat It craft tool, or any craft tool that has the same power of like heat as another one, but doesn't have so much air that blows out of it. That's the kind of tool that you need, and you're going to have to come back a little distance so that you can gently sort of heat it, and then as it starts to melt you can come closer. So I might speed this bit up so you don't have to listen to the heat tool. So I don't know if you could tell from above the way I was holding the heat tool about 6 inches away to begin with, and then you could see that they were still moving around from the heat or the air of the heat tool. So just as you start to see them not move around so much, you can come in slightly closer and slightly closer, and then eventually you get close enough that they've started to melt, so they're not going to blow off, and then they'll actually fully melt as well. So you can still use the embossing sprinkles from above your project too. I just wanted to be able to show you that. So, to finish off the card, really simple, just flip it over, put some adhesive on the back of it, and again, this one you kind of really do want to go right up to the edges to help this stay stuck down flat. Because we've got the 3 layers of 300 GSM cardstock, it is quite a thick piece, so you do really want to get the adhesive as close to the edges as you can to sort of help it stay down nicely. Then we can take the backing paper off, and then get our card blank and add this onto here with a nice white border around the edge to tie in the white sentiment and the white sparkles or sprinkles we just scattered onto there. Press that nice and firmly so it's going to get stuck nice and flat to our card blank as well, and then you can just sort of bend it to shape it so it's flatter. And that is our finished card from this tutorial. I really like that. I definitely prefer it to the original one that I'd done with the different background and using the browns and reds. I know some people this will be more your cup of tea, but I actually really like how this one turned out. I do like both of them, but this one I really like, whereas this one I'm like, it's okay, but it's, well, this one looks more like, I suppose, the technique I was trying to mimic, but I just feel like the background was too big of a detail. I should have used something with smaller details in it, because this starburst one, or with the snowflakey kind of one, works really nicely because it has smaller details in. So maybe if you want to give this a go and you have this deer panel, maybe instead of using that beautiful stitched one from Jamie, Sue had at least 3 new background panel designs in her first festive collection from 2022, so the June collection. I was planning on using some of them in my Advent series, so hopefully you might have seen them if I ended up using them. I seem to have too many ideas, so I'm not sure if I'm going to get a chance to film all of them. But yeah, you might see them later on, but that kind of background would have worked really nicely behind this one, because it would have given it smaller interest, so you could actually tell what was behind here, because you can't really tell that that's holly leaves and poinsettias and roses behind there. a little bit too difficult to tell, but I still do like it. I just prefer these two, I think. I really like how that one turned out. I'm very pleased with that. So I hope you liked the technique. I'll probably be revisiting this or something similar, trying to recreate like a three-dimensional embossing folder look. Maybe next time I'll use small dies rather than bigger dies, but yeah, I probably will come back to this kind of technique, so do let me know if you'd be interested in that as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!